On this episode of the show, I have with me Ashwin Baskaran. He is VP of Engineering at Mercury, and we're going to be talking about building versus inheriting a team. Obviously, if you're an engineering leader, you probably found yourself inheriting teams and sometimes the opportunity of building teams. And there are differences, and we'll talk to Ashwin about that, factors to consider. We're going to talk about some of the adjustments you have to make when you do have to build versus inherit a team as an executive, and a few other things in there. Ashwin, thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Amir.
Absolutely. All right. What do you guys do at Mercury before we start?
Mercury is a fintech. We offer a bunch of services for entrepreneurs and other kinds of founders.
All right. I'm sure there's a lot of exciting stuff happening there. But obviously, this episode we're going to be talking about building versus inheriting a team. Obviously, focusing a little bit more on leadership. And I think this is a great episode because it's really applicable. If you're at a startup, if you're at a big company, it doesn't matter. This is an aspect that leaders do have to deal with. I guess let's talk about the key differences, right? So obviously you're building a team, you're inheriting a team. I sometimes have to think even when you're inheriting a team, you're still building a team. So maybe talk us through a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think you're right. So there's definitely like a lot of ways in which those two scenarios are actually the same thing. And there's just some variations. I think with inheriting in particular, there's probably like a lot of failure modes that you could fall into, which is where, maybe some of the nuance and some of the experience comes in. You build up some scar tissue as you go along, make some mistakes. But yeah, I think there's some things that you could call like kind of universal principles, and then some things that sort of are more specific to one or the other. In the build case, you have more degrees of freedom, but you could also think of it as more ways to make mistakes. And in the inherit case, it's more like a lot of emphasis on kind of building awareness of the situation before you go in with too many actions.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? When I talk to leaders, and when you are obviously building and you're growing a team versus your inherited team, and potentially there are issues with the team. I guess when you do happen to find yourself in a situation where you are inheriting a team, you're brought in as the leader for different reasons. I guess a lot of times they want a different impact, right? We don't even know what that is. It's just something different potentially, or it's going to be different. Maybe they want you to backfill for a leader who's leaving, but nonetheless, you're going to be different than the manager that was there, good or bad. When you are looking at that and you're inheriting a team, stepping into somebody else's shoes for whatever the reason, I mean, what are some of the things you have to be sensitive to? And not just from a process standpoint, but as the empathetic human side of a leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it starts with trying to understand the expectations a bit. And those expectations can be different from sort of, for example, the CEO who might be bringing you on as a hiring manager or a CTO or something like that. It could be different from the people who end up being a part of your team, keeping in mind that some of them may or may not have been involved in the interview process. So they didn't really have much of a say in whether you were joining the team or not as their manager, as their boss. And then you actually have to be sensitive to who you're replacing if you are replacing someone. So what was their role? How were they received by, all of the different people that they worked with? Maybe they were a really well-liked leader who was ineffective for some reason, or they were, very effective, but not liked. Kind of understanding that situation is really important because it gives you some insight into, how to explain your differences. So in the scenario where people were explicitly like looking for something different, it's a little bit easier to come in and just kind of be yourself. It's obvious that something wasn't working. There's consensus that things weren't working. That's fine. That's one scenario to come in. But most often there's some gray area, right? There's some people who are supporters, some people who are detractors of the person who's leaving. And yeah, so again, going back to that awareness point, like you really have to get a sense of, where the organization was in sort of in relation to that person who left, so that you can mold your approach. But this does remind me of sort of one of the things that I was saying are kind of universal things, which is like you do have to come in with somewhat of a low ego. I guess it's like I said, it's universal. You always probably want to operate with a low ego, but this is a scenario where I think in particular a low ego is like really critical. Right? If you come in knowing that you're replacing someone and you just come in assuming that you're better in some way, maybe you are, but maybe you're not. That can kind of be like a really big failure mode.
That's actually a really good point. And I guess maybe one of the hardest things to do is, whether the person you're inheriting a team from, whether they're liked or they weren't up to snuff, and there's a lot of relationship there, a lot of process that was maybe, everyone has, one-on-ones, but every one-on-one's slightly different, right? Everyone says run a one-on-one, but tone's different, the expectation's different. And you do have to walk in and understand how to navigate that, right? Obviously, it seems, most people would say if you were to go and build a team and hire the people you want, that might be easier. But I actually go, well, you know what? Everyone's coming from a different manager. Like, that's why I said I don't really see the problem as very different, because if they're coming from another manager, there's still that, storming, norming, conform, all those things that have to happen for a team to work. I mean, when it comes to building a team and getting to choose some of those factors versus inheriting a team, is it vastly different? I mean, is there some truth to the fact that, hey, someone's coming from a different manager in both scenarios?
There is. I think the mistake you can make with build, which you kind of by definition cannot make with inherit, is, for example, you hire too many people that just think like you. Or you're building a team with this kind of preconceived notion of what the team should look like and how it should operate, versus, hey, I need people who believe in the outcome or who are interested in the outcome and kind of bring some ideas and unique experience. And, you're there as an executive leader to kind of mold and shape and kind of guide, put some guardrails, make sure we're still working towards the objective, all of that kind of good stuff. Whereas with inherit, I think it kind of forces you into that mindset. Like, unless you're coming in to rebuild like a absolutely terrible team or something, which is, not going to be true most of the time. Most of the time, yeah, there's probably some things that can be improved and lots of things that are going pretty well. Yeah, you're a little bit more, you're less likely, I guess, to make that kind of mistake. Like, I just know better, because you're probably coming in. There's some people who think a little bit differently from you. They're doing some things that are not exactly the way you would have done it, but you can see that it's actually working out pretty well for the company. Which is kind of true. Like, I came into Mercury 18 months ago. I didn't come in to solve like a specific immediate problem, like something was broken and I was brought in to fix it, right? It was more like, hey, we want to scale. Let's bring in somebody with some scaling experience. And sort of, it's a different set of problems, right? Things were actually fine. And so it's a lot less likely, unless I'm really full of myself, to come in and be like, oh yeah, I just know better than all of these folks, so I'm just going to do something different, right? So I think of it more like the types of things that you're likely to make mistakes on are different, but the principles certainly remain the same.
Let me ask you a question. I am kind of curious because you've been a leader for a while, different types of orgs. When you look at job opportunities and you look at places you could go to, the idea of inheriting a team versus given the opportunity to build a team, or at least maybe having more influence on building a team. From your experience, do you prefer one over the other, or is there things that you've gone, hey, you know what? If I had a preference, I'd choose one over the other?
No, I don't think I have a preference, actually. I think I've seen that with a lot of other leaders I worked with, including like some of my former managers and stuff like that. I think, and this might go back a little bit to your point about like underlying these are some fairly shared principles. It's not, the scenarios are not that different. What I do see is, for example, some people are more entrepreneurial, right? I think, some people are just more likely to start their own business and start their own company and kind of things like that. And they may have a bias towards smaller team and kind of, hey, give me the money, give me the funding and the charter, and I'll go from there. Versus a more established company where the team has already been set up. I think the problems are a little bit different, and they're all interesting though. So sometimes you have a preference for one or the other, but to me, there are some very interesting challenges in inheriting a team. I've done that a couple of times. I've done some build as well. Probably more inherit than build, which is also kind of fairly expected. And with inherit, like there's many more like change management type things. There's a lot more like influence building and kind of things like that, which are, fascinating to the right kind of nerd.
I like that. When you are inheriting a team, you're building a team. I mean, there's a notion of, you mentioned molding, and we are talking about, trying to obviously help improve the org and the team and deliver better, all those things that a leader wants to do. When it comes to molding, I guess this is more art than science. I don't think there's one right answer. So it's just, from your perspective, when it comes to molding, what are areas that you try to influence? And then maybe conversely, what are areas that you're like, hey, you know what? It's better to let the team figure some of these things out and be a little bit less impactful.
Yeah. I think the way I try to approach that is to start with the things that matter the most to you, and use those topics as a way to suss out, like, hey, is there support? Are there other people that think like this? Does this feel like sort of anathema to the company because they're used to working a different way, or they believe we should work a different way? Which, again, not right or wrong. It's more like, hey, let's figure out where the company is, where the team is, how the team thinks, so you know what to push on. Because I think one thing you got to keep in mind as an incoming leader is you do want to make a positive impact, right? And you want to find a problem that the team and the company cares about, and you want to solve it in a way that the team and company feels is aligned with their values, their culture, their principles. So I think if you can also make sure that both those things can be achieved while you're working on a problem that you actually care about, and in a way that you actually care about, then that just increases the chance of success. It helps you build trust. It helps the rest of your team feel like, okay, this person has got something, they're adding some value, and they seem aligned with our general direction. So finding those points of alignment is a good way to kind of start with an inheriting a team scenario. I think if you don't have that, obviously the failure mode you fall into is you're pushing really hard on something that, is like swimming upstream with respect to the company's culture, or you haven't found your detractors, and your detractors are silently kind of sabotaging your effort because you didn't take the trouble to go ask them, like, hey, what do you think about this? Do you think we should do this? And the same thing would apply to the approach as well. It's not just the problem that you solve, but so like, hey, I think we should, improve the predictability of our delivery by writing more comprehensive design docs. Well, maybe that doesn't quite work, right? Maybe it worked because, you were in a type of environment where, like, medical devices or something, highly specified, very safety sensitive, et cetera, and a certain kind of approach works. But you're in a newer company playing in a newer space. Customer behavior is not fully understood. So you have to be much more experimental. Yeah. So you can't just come in and just apply something that worked from your prior experience. So getting into that and sort of trying to find the thing that, has a good alignment between the way you want to operate and the problem that the company wants and the way the team wants to solve that problem. I think that's like a really good, that's a good place to make that first impact. And then it gives you some influence to use to drive the larger changes.
Absolutely. I guess if you are, you're a new leader, you're either building, inheriting, molding, we're trying to influence one way or the other. I mean, all these things in some capacity. For you as a leader, when you look at your first 30, 60, 90 days, right? And obviously your stakeholders might give you some room and latitude. All that's fine. But for you personally, how do you measure those early days when you inherit a team? Because it's still early. You're trying to get your bearings. You want to know a little bit of feedback, but maybe no one's giving you the feedback because it's still too early. So you are operating with a little bit of trying to read the tea leaves. How do you manage that?
It's, I think there are two parts to that, right? The first part is like you do have to telegraph your intent a bit. Because if you don't give people something to react to and provide feedback, well, you're definitely not getting any feedback. So to give yourself a chance of getting feedback, you certainly have to telegraph your intent. The other aspect of telegraphing your intent is even simply saying like, hey, it looks like things are generally pretty good. So I'm going to go into listening mode. I'm not going to try to go into problem solving mode for some time. And just kind of telegraphing that intent helps the team kind of like it helps answer some questions that they might otherwise have. For example, people may think, well, where is this new person? Like, I don't see them anywhere. I don't see them opining on a Slack thread. I don't see them in my team meetings. Like, where are they? What are they even doing? But if you already told them, like, the reason is I don't expect to be involved in a lot of things yet. I'm more asking a few people questions. I'm setting up some one-on-ones and I'm trying to read some docs, and then I will come to you, give me another 30 days, give me 30 days to come start talking to you guys. Like that, I think helps set some expectations. Of course, it could be the opposite. This is just one example. And the second part of it is you do have to seek feedback. But I think the way you seek feedback is not, what shall I say? Like, you don't want to make it seem like you're asking for personal feedback. Like, hey, how am I doing? I think that's where people say like, I don't know how you're doing. Like you're new. I don't even know you yet. So it really goes back to sort of identifying one or two things that you want to work on and asking people, hey, what do you think about this as a thing to work on? Should we work on this? Is this a problem? So-and-so said it's a problem. Do you also feel it's a problem? If not, what would you rather work on? And so I think that accomplishes two things. One is you're building some context for yourself to be effective in the future. And it also telegraphs to people that you're actually serious about working on the right things, not just working on the things that, you imagined are the right things to do. So I think those are some good things to do when you kind of walk in that during that first 30, 60, 90-day period. I would say, like, especially as a senior leader and actually a leader of any kind, you better be adding value by then in a way that's fairly visible. Otherwise, you're probably doing something wrong. So yeah, for that first period when getting feedback is a little bit harder, you just have to be much more intentional and you have to seek a certain kind of feedback. Don't ask people to provide too many of their opinions about you or your specific approach, but focus it more on problems and context building.
I love that. Yeah, I think the point about trying to avoid needing the personal reassurance as a leader is very key because people can read that. So I think that's actually very, very valuable to hear. I guess as a leader, when you are inheriting a team, you have to build a team. Are there differences for you yourself as the executive? Do you potentially come in there with a different mindset in terms of how you're going to execute and operate?
I would say yes. To some extent, right? So, for example, in a build scenario, you're probably more obviously coming in saying, okay, I want to come in and assess the gaps. I want to see, I don't know, let's say you have a small team of 10, you're coming in to build out a team of 30 or 40, maybe you just got a funding round, whatever the case may be. You're coming in saying, my first job is to assess where the gaps are, what kind of people I need, things like that. Whereas in the inherit scenario, I'm much more looking inward, right? I'm saying, hey, I have some sense of what the team might need, and I will build that over time. But how many of those people already exist? Because it's much more valuable to put people in the right place if they already have some context from having been on the team than if they're coming in from the outside, right? So, for example, if you say, okay, I think this space is large and it needs a staff engineer or it needs a director or something like that. it's better if that person is internally available. They just haven't been given the right, right guidance or the right platform to do that kind of work. Um, so that's an example of a difference. I think the other thing with a build versus inherit scenario is in the build case, you're really trying to articulate what it is you want to do. Like, what do you think a good team looks like? What are your values? And I don't know, like, do you want a team that's really focused on learning? Do you want a team that's really focused on execution? Whatever those values are. Whereas in an inherit scenario, you're really coming and saying, I want to understand what the existing team does and then look for that delta. And if I have, if there's a 20% delta between my values and the company values, then I think about, do I need to move towards the company or do I need to try to pull the company towards me? Um, so yeah, those are a couple of, I would say, like differences in mindset that you go in with in each of those scenarios.
Absolutely. I guess I mean that's actually it makes a lot of sense in both those different environments. When you are interviewing and you're looking at jobs, we've always heard, you're not just being interviewed, you're interviewing the company, right? And I think that's true. I think the one thing that people also are saying without saying is you're also interviewing the team you're going to be inheriting or building. Are there things that you are looking for during the interview process to understand better? Because as a leader, you're stepping in, you're supposed to deliver with whatever you have or the changes, you're responsible. But when you are interviewing, you are looking at opportunities. How do you go about trying to understand in the short time period that you have to make sure that you're walking into either of these scenarios in an optimal setting?
Yeah, it's hard. And this is, you used the term art versus science some time ago. I think this is also a bit of an art. And sometimes you get the signal, sometimes you don't. You do take a bit of a chance. So a couple of things, one is just looking for alignment, right? So, you have to sort of craft it for the company and for the situation, but like a sort of a naive example of that would be, hey, what are the top priorities of the company? In actual practice, you would want something much more narrow than that. But, what do people say when you ask that? And I have actually had at least one negative experience with that where, people gave slightly different answers. They gave quite different answers. That was a problem. Including things around like, oh, our architecture is great. We're just not building the right tools on top of the right products, with the architecture. And other people saying, basically the opposite. Like, we need to rebuild everything from scratch because we're just not able to deliver the products that we want to deliver. And, then when you go up and try to figure out, hey, where this just kind of came from, you kind of find out, oh, well, there's actually like this old guard and then there's a new guard and they have these disagreements and say, okay, maybe this is not the place I want to go into. So I think that's one. The other, I think, is, I think it's important to share how you might actually approach those, and see how they react. Right? If they say like, oh, we want to improve our velocity, and you say, okay, I think we should do X, Y, Z. We should invest in infrastructure and blah, blah, blah. You want to see what they say, right? If they say like, sounds useful. How might that work? What are the trade-offs you're going to make? Well, that's one thing. If they say like, no, we think it should be done differently and here's why, then now you have information and you can decide whether you want to go and have that push and pull discussion, or if there's some kind of misalignment and, maybe they don't actually want you and your ideas after all. They just want somebody to kind of, move the pieces around the way they tell you to move the pieces around. Yeah. So I think you can definitely do some digging to look for that alignment, see if people are actually agreeing on the problems that need to be solved. So your stakeholders, your stakeholder relationships don't become really complicated. And you can look for some kind of values alignment by actually, you take the lead, share your values, share your approach, share your thinking. Don't just respond to the interview questions. They say, well, how might you do X? How did you solve X in the past? And you just solve it and you're so focused on kind of doing well in the interview that you end up not getting any insight into how they're thinking. So it's like, it's not just that they should like your answer. Like, you want to share enough information that you get a sense of how they react.
Absolutely. I like that a lot. Ashwin, I appreciate your time. I appreciate kind of stepping through these various scenarios. I'm sure I've not asked you everything possible, and I'm sure there's a question somebody will have out there and would love to be able to pick your brain. Is there a good way of connecting with you if somebody does have a follow-up question?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, first name, last name. So Ashwin Baskaran, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me.
Okay, brilliant. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Amir. Enjoy the conversation.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, obviously we talked about, the differences in building and inheriting a team, and we talked about, factors to consider, the conversation around molding and, what happens in both of those scenarios and some of the adjustments you have to make as a leader. So if you found this episode valuable, please share this with somebody else who also might find it valuable. I would appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment, leave me a review. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.